Good evening. Welcome to Northbeat. I'm Megan Roberts. It's a grim outlook for a looming wildfire season. The federal government is bracing for a repeat of last year's devastating and record-breaking summer. Officials say there are already more than 70 fires burning, many of them holdovers from last year. They're primarily in British Columbia, northern Alberta, and the Northwest Territories. And those are some of the same areas that have the worst expected drought conditions for this year. Today, several cabinet ministers unveiled Ottawa's plans to prepare for the worst. Lindsay Duncombe has those details.
It is getting warm outside across much of the country. Whatever snow fell has melted or is melting, and federal ministers sound nervous.
We can expect that the wildfire season will start sooner and end later and potentially be more explosive.
This is what officials are worried about, a repeat of last year. 8 firefighters died, 15 million hectares burned. That's 7 times the annual average. Smoke blanketed the continent, the entire city of Yellowknife forced to flee. This is what conditions look like now, dry across much of the country. Extreme drought conditions in parts of Alberta, the Northwest Territories, and BC. Just how dry? Check out this riverbed in Prince George, British Columbia. Adding to the risk, predictions of above normal temperatures in the weeks and months to come.
This is really an all hands on deck moment. This is not something that any level of government can address on its own.
First Nations are especially vulnerable. Training programs and additional staff are helping many communities prepare.
If we have persistent dry weather and no precipitation, then I'll get nervous. And for me, the biggest thing is to have my crews ready to go.
And ahead of next week's budget, the federal government announced it is doubling the tax credit for volunteer firefighters to $6,000, potentially more cash for those on the front lines. Lindsay Duncombe, CBC News, Vancouver.
You heard Lindsay mention the evacuation of Yellowknife in her story. It was just one of many communities in the north and Canada that fled wildfires. Minister Harjit Sajjan says more than 230,000 people were evacuated across the country last year. That requires a huge amount of coordination from multiple governments, and sometimes, as was the case with the Yellowknife evacuation, across multiple jurisdictions. During today's wildfire forecast, Sajjan was asked about pilot projects for a national emergency response agency. Here's what he said.
Last year, when we saw the devastating impact, we've seen the increased reliance on firefighters. And one we needed to have more, as Minister Wilkinson just updated on the number of firefighters that have been also trained. Well, the other portion is to reduce the reliance on the Canadian Armed Forces, because they play a very important role, but at the same time, they can only provide up to Type 1 level firefighters. But in addition to firefighting, there's a huge component of what's needed to supporting Canadians at the time of emergency. So the evacuation is extremely important. Registration, the quick registration for them so they can get the supports that they need is very important. And within that, a lot of work that needs to be done. So through the Humanitarian Workforce Program, we are now launching a pilot project in British Columbia and the Northwest Territories to look at coordinating the support, to making sure that we have agreements already in place. The organizations have been already given funding to increase their capacity. We're looking at the numbers that they'll be able to provide and work through a normal RFA process that we normally would do with the Canadian Armed Forces to look at saying how many people can be deployed into what areas. So that's what we're looking at here.
That's Federal Minister of Emergency Preparedness Harjit Sajjan talking about a pilot project underway this year in the NWT and BC. Now, fire season last year hit the north hard, both the NWT and the Yukon. In the NWT, more than 1,000 fires burned, and in the Yukon, Wildland Fire responded to over 200 blazes. Today in the Yukon, officials gave an update on what they're expecting. Rafsan Farooq-Jugal was listening in on the briefing today, and he joins me now live from our studio in Whitehorse. So Rafsan, what are officials expecting this fire season to look like?
Now, Megan, as you mentioned, last year was an active wildfire season here in the Yukon. Now, 2 communities were evacuated, Old Crow, which is only accessible by plane, and Mayo. Now, Ibex Valley, which is a community just a 30-minute drive outside of Whitehorse, was also almost evacuated. So everyone is really interested in what this summer could bring. Now, during the briefing today, the government was cautious about what warmer temperatures could bring. Now, northern parts of this territory, particularly north of the Klondike, have received more snow than usual. But in southern areas, snowfall has been about average, and in certain central areas, it has been below average. Now, the temperature forecast for April and May is also consistent with what the numbers normally are. So overall, the situation does not seem too dire at the moment, but the government is adamant that things could change very quickly. And they're asking for folks to be prepared. They're asking residents to fireproof their homes ahead of the peak of the wildfire season.
Okay, so that's something that residents can do, but what's the government doing to prepare?
Now, the government, Wildland Fire has said that a lot of the firefighters who participated in the last fire season are also returning this year. Now, they have received over 100 job applications for various firefighting positions, and a good chunk of those folks have been in training over the past couple of months, veteran firefighters and newer ones alike. Now, with the training happening, what the government tells us that at any given point, there could be about 75 initial attack firefighters ready to respond to wildfires, and about 40 administrative and overhead staff who would be helping with the emergency efforts. Now, Wildland Fire Management also told us that they will be engaging in prescribed burns in the coming weeks. So what that effectively means is that they will be burning off fuel on the ground and setting up a perimeter. So if there is a wildfire that's out of control, it can no longer pass through the area because there's no longer any fuel to burn. Now, areas in Watson Lake, Carmax, Mayo, and Whitehorse have been identified for prescribed burning.
And we're not just weeks away from fire season, Rafsan. Flood season is also on the horizon. So what do officials have to say about that?
So this year, the Klondike Valley and Old Crow have been identified as high-risk areas. Now, what that means is that the Klondike River has a high potential for ice jams in early May. Now, later on in the month, a different river, the Porcupine River by Old Crow, is also susceptible to the same issue. A potential ice jam could cause flooding in the area. And governments, they have been looking at river flows, the snow and ice conditions, and really the projected temperature changes over the coming weeks and months to really be able to make these predeterminations.
Okay, we'll keep an eye on it. Thank you, Rafsan. That's the CBC's Rafsan Farouk-Jugal reporting live from our studio in Whitehorse. In the Northwest Territories, officials aren't quite ready to give an outlook. Snow surveys in the territory are still underway, and NWT Fire is also looking at spots that could still be burning from last year. The agency posted this map on social media. It paints a picture of just how big those fires were last year and where officials think they could still be burning. The yellow lines in the Dutcho and North and South Slave will soon be surveyed using infrared scanners. Nearly 1,000 kilometers of land will be examined to see what hotspots remain. Wildfire smoke is becoming more and more common across Canada. It was intense last year, and it traveled across borders and oceans, causing problems worldwide. Calgary got hit hard last year, a reality it's faced for a while now, and there are concerns the season ahead will prove to be no exception. Today, Ottawa detailed how it plans to help. Terry Trembath brings us those details.
Alberta's wildfire season officially started March 1st, and the forecast falls into place with the federal government's update today on the situation nationwide. Jonathan Wilkinson is the Minister of Energy and Natural Resources.
Early projections for 2024 indicate the potential for early and above normal fire activity over the spring months as a result of ongoing drought, warmer than normal temperatures.
On top of developing a series of early risk assessments and creating early notification systems for air quality risks, $256 million over 5 years is earmarked for equipment. It's money Alberta accessed last year as well. Indigenous Services Minister Patty Hajdu says the province's Indigenous communities will also have dedicated funding for a new position.
All 48 First Nations in Alberta will have a funded emergency management coordinator position. This dedicated person will help them coordinate their work to prepare for and to face wildfires.
Last year, the province spent $1.5 billion of its contingency fund fighting wildfires. Terry Trembath, CBC News, Calgary.
It's a major legal victory for a Yukon First Nation. The Yukon government wanted to overturn an earlier decision that quashed a proposed mining project in the Beaver River watershed and sent it back to the consultation phase. The Yukon Court of Appeal has dismissed that request. As Maria Tobin tells us, this is just the latest in a 3-year dispute.
The appeal court ruled Yukon failed to recognize Nachonayak's right to help manage land in its traditional territory. The proposed exploration site will likely be cancelled now that the Yukon government's appeal has been quashed. The Beaver River watershed sits about 100 kilometers north of Mayo. It's known for pristine wilderness, but the area has yet to be covered by a land use plan. That's something the First Nation of Nacho-Nayak-Dun has demanded for over 30 years. Back in 2020, Vancouver-based Metallic Minerals submitted a plan to mine for lead, silver, and zinc over 10 years. The plan was approved by the Yukon government in 2021. But shortly after, the First Nation filed a petition to the Supreme Court of Canada for Yukon's failure to properly consult. The First Nation argued Yukon didn't give much thought to the concerns of the First Nation. Those complaints had previously been dismissed by the Yukon government. In last year's ruling, the court said Yukon, quote, should have included discussions about the land use planning process, specifically the ongoing intergovernmental agreement land use planning process. The appeal court agreed. Maria Tobin, CBC News, Whitehorse.
The federal government announced a new fund to tackle youth mental health. The goal is to help young people access care. The government plans to spend $500 million on the program. The money will be divided between provincial and territorial organizations. No specifics were given about how that will play out in the north, but the Minister of the Treasury Board did say the money will go towards a range of issues.
This is a across-the-board team effort to ensure that we are addressing the issues that Nunavut faces, and indeed the North faces, following on from the COVID-19 pandemic in the area of housing, in the area of mental health supports, in the area of healthcare more generally. And we will continue to do what is necessary to respond to the particular issues that the North is facing.
Anand says the full details will be released on Tuesday when the federal budget is made public.
Priya doesn't love exercising, but loves the way it makes her feel. Max doesn't love cooking, but loves homemade meals with his kids. Paul doesn't love doing his taxes, but loves getting the benefits and credits he qualified for. Learn more about benefits and credits like the GST HST credit and Canada Workers Benefit at canada.ca/every dollar counts. A message from the Government of Canada.
Moments that are so on trend right now. Ticket pricing, artificial intelligence, being a Swiftie, wild fashion trends, showbiz, and cancel culture. Join me, Alameen Abdul-Mahmoud, for Commotion, available now on CBC Listen or wherever you get your podcasts.
Sipping on a bit of Henny, can I get a little Remy? Feeling heavy, chilling but I'm feeling ready. Pulled up in a big old Chevy.
The Bank of Canada held its key interest rate steady at 5% for a sixth consecutive setting. But it's also signaling that rate cuts are getting closer. The question remains, though, when and by how much? Nisha Patel has more.
Growing more slowly than the working.
The Bank of Canada says inflation is coming under control, but officials are keeping interest rates steady for now.
We are seeing what we need to see, but we need to see it for longer to be confident that the progress towards price stability will be sustained. If you look at
just how much longer was unclear, though the governor did open the door to a rate cut in June.
Yes, it's within the realm of possibilities.
After a series of rapid hikes, rates have been at 5% since July of last year, forcing many consumers to curb their spending.
The economy is in a soft spot. We've seen that business bankruptcies are piling up. That's beginning to infect the labor market data.
Economists say the central bank is in a tricky spot.
What they're trying to do is get rates down without stoking inflation, but also avoid pushing the economy into a contraction.
Canadian mortgage holders are desperate for relief. Millions are facing renewals this year at dramatically higher rates.
It's shocking. It's like a 40% increase in payment, if not more. So yeah, there's a lot of payment shock that goes on, and that's worrisome for everybody.
This mortgage broker warns while interest rates rose quickly, they may not come down at the same pace.
Even if the Bank of Canada cuts, and they will, we don't know how fast they will cut, and we don't know how deeply they will cut.
While the central bank says the June cut is possible, many market watchers say interest rate relief is more likely to come in July. Nisha Patel, CBC News, Toronto.
There are new concerns about the safety of Boeing airliners. A whistleblower claims there are construction flaws in the 777 and 787 passenger jets. It's the latest in a growing list of concerns about Boeing aircraft. And for the second time this year, the head of the company, Dave Calhoun, is being called to appear in front of U.S. lawmakers. Cameron McIntosh has the story.
They're among the top-selling wide-bodied jets in the world. Boeing's 777 and 787 Dreamliner. Manufacturing processes for both now being investigated by the Federal Aviation Administration.
I am hopeful that the FAA will not allow this to go unanswered.
Boeing engineer Sam Salafor alleging the 777 could have damaged parts. That changes to manufacturing of 787s could leave fuselages with improperly closed gaps.
I literally saw people jumping on the pieces of the airplane to get them to align.
You certainly don't see that in Boeing's corporate videos. Boeing denies Salafor's allegations, along with allegations from his lawyer.
He was threatened with physical violence. He was threatened with termination.
Salafor worked in the same South Carolina plant as another whistleblower, John Barnett, who also raised concerns about the 787. He was found dead in his truck in March of an apparent self-inflicted gunshot wound. Boeing, meanwhile, is reeling from recent mid-flight scares. A 737-800 engine cover falling off just this week. A 757-200 suffering wing damage in February. And that 737 MAX 9 losing a door plug in January. The largest aircraft builder in the world, orders were up last month despite its troubles, which have slowed production schedules.
And it's probably going to take a long time for them to get out of this because, again, you have to change the culture and they have to go back to a more safety-oriented culture.
Boeing's CEO has announced his retirement later this year. Salafor has been invited to testify in Washington next week.
I'm doing this not because I want Boeing to fail, but because I want it to succeed and prevent the crashes from happening.
Although there is an investigation, neither of the planes have been grounded. Boeing insisting it always works with regulators. Cameron McIntosh, CBC News, Winnipeg.
This week's solar eclipse had a lot of people looking up, but a unique observatory in BC uses sound, not sight, to observe the sun. Camille Vernet explains.
Nested in an Okanagan Valley, far from urban interferences, the Dominion Radio Astrophysical Observatory is the only one in the country doing radio astronomy. It's here where they gather the radio waves of the solar system and listen to the stars. And as stars go, none are more important than the sun.
The one that measures the solar flux is the one over there.
The tiny one?
The tiny one.
These two dishes might be small, but they're very important, according to astronomer Andrew Gray.
We're observing the nearest star. The other stars are all light years away. The sun is light minutes away, so it has a much bigger impact on the Earth than any other object in the universe. So when the sun hiccups, we want to know about it.
Because sometimes the sun gets a little feisty.
What we call a solar flare, a large release of energy on the surface of the sun. And those flares are often accompanied by an ejection of matter. If that matter crosses the Earth's orbit at the same time that the Earth is there, it has a huge impact on the Earth.
This impact is called a solar storm, and it can damage satellites, power lines, and navigation systems.
This is a record of a coronal mass ejection event in 1989 that caused a power outage in Quebec. You can see the amplitudes here are enormous.
But most of the time, the sun is actually rather quiet.
So what you want to know is, why is this uninteresting? It's good news that there are no flares. This is the entire data set from 1947 to the current day of every measurement made with this experiment. It's the longest continuous record of solar radio emissions anywhere in the world.
Historic and rich data that is widely used in the scientific community. In Saskatoon, Catherine McWilliams is researching the impact of solar storms on the upper atmosphere.
Having these really long data sets are really nice to try to establish patterns and see how the behavior is common over a large number of events.
And space weather centers around the world are using the information coming from Penticton to predict solar storms.
The radio waves don't care if it's cloudy. We don't rely on counting sunspots or other means of measuring solar activity that relies on being able to see the sun. And this is important for understanding future behavior of the sun.
From sunrise to sunset, they track the sun, because listening in to the sun today helps predict its future. Camille Vernet, CBC News, Penticton.
Unusually mild weather in the winter led to an early spring in some parts of the country. In Abbotsford, BC, most flowers are already in full bloom at this year's Tulip Festival. Saurabh Sandhu paid a visit.
Red, white, yellow and purple. Rows upon rows of tulips are on display at Lakeland Flowers in Abbotsford.
The colors are just incredible. It's just a sea of colors here.
The flowers are so nice.
For owner Nick Warmerdam, the annual Tulip Festival is a time to sit back with his best friend Diesel by his side to take in what he calls a labor of love. He's been growing tulips for 3 decades.
This land, because it was reclaimed from a lake, the soil is quite sandy, and that makes it a lot easier for us to sift all the bulbs out of the soil during the summer when we have to harvest them.
Last year, the festival made a triumphant return after most of Warmerdam's bulbs were destroyed in the devastating floods of 2021. Warmerdam says this year the milder winter temperatures saw flowers blooming earlier than usual. 5 million tulips to be exact.
We had 4 or 5 days of weather in the 20, it was around here, it was 23, 25 degrees. And with a tulip bulb, they react very quickly to the weather, to temperature. So we are ending up with an early start.
Visitors can expect to see more than 100 varieties of tulips, 30 of them new this year. Some bulbs brought in all the way from Netherlands.
We might switch, change some of the varieties for new ones, but I don't think I can manage having more than 100 varieties, or otherwise I'm going to get mixed up.
Amongst the flowers are scenic photo backdrops, like at this canoe or on these swings. Warmerdam says last year's festival attracted more than 56,000 people to his farm.
We're going to have to see whether the Mother Nature is going to keep the tulips looking nice all the way till Mother's Day or not. The cooler it is, the longer the flowers stay looking nice in bloom.
The festival usually stretches until Mother's Day, but Warmerdam is concerned with the early start. They may not last as long. Saurabh Sandhu, CBC News, Abbotsford.
And that is Northbeat for tonight. For news anytime, go to cbc.ca/north. We leave you with more fun from Iqaluit's Tunic Time Festival. Thank you for watching. I'm Megan Roberts. Have a good night.
What happens when we transform the country into one massive obstacle course? 20 total strangers are about to find out.
Okay, game on!
Relationships will be forged and crushed.
I want to rip their heads off.
In an all-out battle for glory.
Oh my God! I'm glad that there's cameras around. Yeah, me too. Do it in, replay.
Only one thing's for sure. They are not ready for what's coming.
Let's go, baby!
So good.
Please be careful.
I'm excited, dude. Me too. We're back with Crime Scene Kitchen. It's a bold choice.
Yes, honey.
It's a very straightforward recipe. This is going to be an absolute showstopper. That's what I'm talking about right there.
Woo!
Yeah. I murdered a donut.
That's a crime scene. Sipping on a bit of Henny. Can I get a little Remy? Feeling heavy. Chilling, but I'm feeling ready. Pulled up in a big old Chevy. Dance floor stops and Miguel them drops. Queen with the locks and the crown on top. Beat in a box, never sound on pops. If it ain't the Henny, give me crown on rocks.
What do we know
about that with Andrew Chang?
I think we can explain.
Watch free on CBC Gem.